Good morning, everyone. If you have had the crud that we've had, I just want to say, sorry, because it'll be a week tomorrow for me, and finally kind of feeling somewhat better, but not quite, and just lingers. But it's good to see y'all today. I know there are others that are battling that sickness. I know some did not want to battle the really chilly, cold weather, but glad you're here this morning. We're going to wrap up, and it's kind of fitting for kind of where we've been through this study and kind of looking at what we're going to do for the sermon today. We've been talking about providence and discipline in this study, and the sermon is looking at discipline in the home. And so we're going to look at that. A couple of lessons I want to kind of do. I still want to do a lesson on singleness. I want to do a lesson as well on what about faithful parents but unfaithful children? Because I know that that's something that parents really struggle with. And so hopefully looking at something like that, we can look at what the Bible says and find comfort and guidance there. But there's a couple of lessons left in this series on the home that I want to do to kind of wrap it up. So some of those might be Sunday night, but there might be one or two that we do into January, just to kind of wrap up the series. But today we will look at discipline in the home. Now, with that being said, looking back at some things we've discussed so far, really the main things we've looked at were persecution and the thoughts that when we deal with persecution, there is a blessing that can come from that. And that's why you have passages like in James 1, verses 2 and 3, that tell us to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, knowing the testing of our faith produces patience. And so there's passages throughout Scripture that encourage us to count it joy, or to be joyful, or to rejoice, to be glad whenever we have to endure persecution. And without finishing the thought, yes, it doesn't make sense, but James explains why. He explains that there's a maturation, a growth of faith when that happens. And that's kind of where we've been the last week or two in discussion of those things. And then we talked about, when we think of persecution, it can bring blessing, according to James 1, 2, and 3, Romans 5, Matthew 5, we looked at that last week, verses 10 through 12, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on to say further, blessed are you when others revile you, when they persecute you, when they say all kinds of manner of evil things against you. It's again this encouragement to understand you might feel woe is me, but understand the blessing that's present in the persecution. Because here's the reality for us. If we were like everyone else in the world, if we lived the same way, if we did the same things, if we chose the same sinful paths and things of that nature, then we wouldn't face persecution. We would be accepted as one of the world. We would just blend right in, and they wouldn't notice. Persecution comes when there's a noticing of a difference. And that's why you have Christians were persecuted because of the difference. The difference in choices, the difference in who they served, the difference in who they claimed to be Lord. As Rome shouted their emperor or Caesar, whoever it is, at different various times, and Christians shouted Jesus. And so, as long as we pursue to live like Christ, there will be persecution throughout life. And so be reminded of that. And when persecution comes, it's a moment for you to reflect and I don't know if I'd say the word celebrate, but acknowledge that you must be doing something right if the world is trying to get you to stumble. And, going back to John 15, we've talked about that passage, so we won't go back there and read it. But in John 15, there's Jesus telling the disciples there that the world hated him before it hated them. So if they really want to follow, they're not greater than the master. Servant's not greater than the master. So if the world hated Jesus, whoever follows Jesus will be hated by the world. And the simple reason is because different than the world. And so one has asked before, if we haven't endured any kind of persecution in a long while, maybe things are just going good. Maybe we look a little too much like the world. And that's one thing we have to ask ourselves. Have I avoided persecution because I've chose to compromise and look like the world? Or am I just kind of in a good season? Because there are seasons where we don't have persecution, and it doesn't mean that we blended in with the world. But that's just something to kind of be mindful of, that persecution will, not might, it will come if we choose to follow Jesus. So that's where we've been, looking at persecution. Now, when we think of the word discipline, in the discussion of discipline, the Hebrew writer began by pointing the readers to Jesus in Hebrews 12. And that's where we're going to be for the sermon as well, so I don't want to harp too much on some of these things. But in Hebrews 12, we know, I know that I have quoted and read many times verses 1 and 2 for different lessons, different reasons, as they're applicable. Now, when you get to Hebrews 12, beginning in verse 3, you have the discipline of God. And I said that we talk about this chapter this morning in the sermon because what we're going to do is look at the discipline of God in Hebrews 12, verse 3 beginning, verse 4 going through about verse 12. And we're going to look from that discipline and translate that to discipline in the home. But here in the discussion of discipline, verse 3, he's pointing people to Jesus. He says, "For consider him," the him there is Jesus, "who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls." He points them to what Jesus endured and his dealings with the way he was treated by these people. Peter also pointed persecuted Christians to Jesus as an example for what it is to suffer for righteousness' sake. If you look at 1 Peter 2 and verse 20 and verse 21 as well. It says, "For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps." You were called to suffering. If you chose to follow Jesus, if you accepted the call in that sense, and that's what it means to be called. You know, the call could be referring to Christians, and you look at the way as a reference to people that follow Jesus. And this calling to follow Jesus, you're called to suffer as Jesus suffered. And so Peter points us back to Jesus. And he says, when you do good, when you pursue righteousness and you're doing things for righteousness' sake, and you suffer, and you're taking it patiently, that's a good thing. Look back to Jesus and remember that. And remember that this acceptance to follow was an acceptance to the suffering that would come. And there were people that came to Jesus, and Jesus basically said, "I don't know if you understand what you're saying. when they said, I want to follow you. Luke 9. There are three individuals that came to Jesus thinking they were ready, yet they weren't. They didn't really fully get it. And Jesus, in Luke 9:23, before those three followers even come to him, he says, if anyone wishes to come after me, if you want to follow me, let him deny himself. Okay, that's hard. Take up your cross daily, this symbol of death. Why would Jesus say, take up your cross? Obviously, here, he's not meaning a literal cross. So what does that mean when he says, take up your cross daily? What do you think it means? Mm-hmm.
But we walk right through that and we carry our cross, just like Christ did. Christ didn't stop talking to the people because some of them wanted to get rid of him. He just kept right on going, and so did the apostles. So, except Mark on that occasion.
Yeah. Steve? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good answers. So we're looking at a denial of self and all that we're going to have to deal with when we deny self and pursue following Jesus. And Jesus carried that cross, and he didn't quit talking despite opposition. He didn't quit serving despite opposition. Remember, when Jesus tells us to do things, it's interesting that I don't see him give us a direction, a commandment that he didn't keep himself. When you think about this moment, if anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself. Did Jesus deny himself? He denied himself in the wilderness in Matthew 4. In chapter 4 there, those three temptations, he denied himself 3 times. He denied himself in the garden as he prayed to God and ultimately found the strength to pray, your will be done, not what I desire. I do desire for the cup to pass from me, but if that's not your will be done. And it wasn't his will, and so Jesus went to the cross out of a desire to please God because it was God's will. It wasn't what Jesus necessarily wanted. He wanted to do the will of God. That's what the will of God was, and so that's what he did. Jesus often denied himself. And for us, there is a denial that has to happen, which means maybe we're not a part of certain popular groups. I know that's typically a conversation we have with teenagers and kids and even college. I say college kids, but at that point, I guess they are technically more adults. They're getting older. Right, Connor? I mean, you're getting older. So, and so you look at, we typically have that conversation of not trying to fit in with the popular crowd, but that's so true too for just people. There's a desire to want to belong, to want to fit in, to want to be accepted, to want to be considered popular. And a denial of self might mean that we deny being a part of that kind of group, that we deny talking a certain way and using certain language, that we deny dressing a certain way, that we deny going certain places and doing certain things. Self-denial. And also a denial of the things that tempt us, the sins that tempt us. There are some things that might not be sinful, but they can really hinder our ability to be a light for Jesus. So even though they might not be sinful, it's probably not the best choice to make. So Jesus says you need to deny yourself every day. Then also he continues with those thoughts, and he says, take up your cross. Going further into self-denial, that image is an image of self-denial because Jesus didn't want to have to go to the cross. But so he denied himself and went there, went and did what God wanted and desired for the plan to go through and be completed for mankind to have a way to be saved from sin. So that cross does remind us of a self-denial that was just mentioned, but it also is a symbol of dying. And we think about to follow Jesus is to deny himself, take up his cross daily. So an idea of a cross daily is an idea of a daily death to self. Connecting and meshing all of that together with that denial of self. Every day when we pick up that cross, figuratively speaking, it's a reminder that we've died to self to live for Christ. Paul explains it in Galatians 2:20. And he says, I have been crucified with Christ. Now, Paul was not literally at that point crucified with Jesus in Galatians 2 and verse 20. So what's he talking about? I have been crucified with Christ. I've died to self, right? When did that happen? When I was baptized for remission of my sins, I died to self. So he says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul explains what it is to take up your cross daily. It is a reminder of the commitment you made when you died to self. Every day you remember the commitment. And every day you make the commitment anew. Not that you're baptized every day anew, but that you remind yourself and cling to and remember, I'm not living for me anymore. Jesus says all this, deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Then you have these three people that come to Jesus and say, hey, I'm going to follow you. And Jesus pretty much tells them, I don't know if you understand what you're saying. You know, sometimes you're not going to have a place to lay your head except a stone in the ground. We're going to sleep on the ground. We're going to walk a lot of places. We're going to be rejected. We're going to go through a lot of difficulty. And many of them would be killed for their faith. Yeah.
And even though today we don't have a crowd out here ready to take our head off, we still have a crowd out here that takes a few verses of the Bible and builds a doctrine on it. And we have to be prepared to contradict those false teachings. I know I don't even remember which ones it was, but there was one instance in that Fox Book Mars where there was this old man. I think he was nearly 90 years old, and this was when the Catholics were burning people at the stake, and he thanked them for the opportunity. That was the last thing he said. He thanked them for the opportunity to stand up for the truth, and he didn't go put. He's all changed my mind.
Yeah.
He stepped forward and he was steadfast. And all we need to do is we need to remember we just need to be steadfast in what we're doing,
Yeah.
no matter what. And that, when you look at the first century Christians,
Yeah.
Although it's not present here in our country right now, something as simple as, well, I don't know if they don't like me anymore, if I say anything, we need to throw that out
Yeah.
and walk forward.
Other comments? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 You know, Brother Terry talking about those that died for their faith, the martyrs, and then Brother Steve talking about a priority and dealing with priorities and the problem of worldly ways of thinking infiltrating our minds and our hearts, which then affects our actions. You know, the things we do and say come from a deeper place than just the surface. And they're kind of a revelation of the things that have been put in. They're a revealing of the things that have molded and shaped who we are. And those things that are taken in are the things that do mold and shape who we are. And kind of looking at both of those thoughts together of persecution and those people that just displayed tremendous faith. And Brother Terry, as you were talking about that one gentleman, I'm pretty certain I have either read, I think I've read about him or read that story or heard it because it sounded very familiar. But, you know, you think back to the Roman Colosseum, and you'd have Christians buried up to their neck in the dirt as they would release lions and other animals, as they would take chariots with blades on the wheel spokes and drive, you know, race chariots and battle chariots with Christians just buried out there. And on top of other brutal types of, you know, where Christians face these trained gladiators and things. So there's just all this brutality and violence and death because of people that refuse to back down. And we're concerned about what somebody might say if we say no to something, or if we say, hey, maybe we don't say that joke, or if we start acting more Christ-like. We're afraid somebody will point it out or whatever else. And so, you know, we do face persecution, but I don't know of anybody in here who's been threatened to be thrown into the Roman Colosseum, you know. And that's not to make light of our persecution, but it's just interesting that sometimes we struggle to remain faithful in our persecution we face in our country. Imagine being in a country where we would have to sneak to be here this morning. In fact, we wouldn't be here this morning. We'd have to meet tonight. because that's the best way, the safest way that we could get together. In fact, in the first century, that's when they got together. It wasn't Sunday morning at 9 or 9:30, right? It was at nighttime. And it was sometimes in homes. It was sometimes in catacombs and tombs where they would try to go and sneak and get there so they could worship and not be caught. Not because they were ashamed, but because they were trying to live. And you look at China and places like that where they still have to sneak around. And they still have to be careful when they worship, where they worship. And we struggle here as much as we say how blessed and thankful we are to be in a country that doesn't persecute us and gives us the freedom to worship and everything. Isn't it interesting that the more freedom you have to worship, the less people want to do it? Yet the more difficult it is to get to a place of worship and to do it safely, the more passionately people do it. That's not a criticism. I get it. We're in Bible class and you're sitting here right now. I understand. But it is something to be mindful of and think about. As I often warn against the comforts of this world, that the more comfortable we become, sometimes the more dull we get to sin and the things around us, the less urgent we are, Brother Steve, about our priorities. And we think we've got time, and we'll take care of some of this other stuff, and I didn't get back there this week, but next week I'll go back. And the more we miss, the easier it is. First time someone misses, they might feel a little guilty. They might feel a lot of guilty. Next time there might still be a little guilt. But the more you do it, the easier it is. There were really two. There was a lot of impacts from COVID, but there were two that were the opposites of each other, and it pertains to worship. One impact of it was people learned to cherish and to remember just how important and valuable it is to be with God's people. They appreciated it more. They appreciated worship as a whole more. The Lord's Supper, they appreciated more as it got dwindled down in time during COVID. That's not a criticism. That's people were trying to figure it out. I understand all that. So that's one side. The other side is you got people that might have already been missing here and there, and then you go a long time where they're given permission to miss, and it's hard for them to find their way back. And then some people's response is, well, we'll just cut our live stream. That's not going to do anything except hurt the people that really can't be here that watch the live stream. Because if you cut our live stream, those people that aren't coming and watching the live stream, they'll just find another one because there's a live stream. You can go on Facebook this morning and find a ton of live streams. But there were kind of these two camps of, and I'm sure there's others as well, but two big camps of you either learn to appreciate worship more, and it was more people that were already kind of on the fringe and missing here and there. Now they just don't come at all. And that's not even thinking about all the other negative things mentally and everything else that we've been dealing with and will continue to deal with for times to come. But priorities are a problem we've had for a long time. That's why we constantly try to remind our parents as you're raising your kids to show them the importance of being here and being with God's people, and not just the importance of being here, but the importance of doing what we do when we come together. Being here is one thing, but actually worshiping God in spirit and in truth. Show them what that looks like when done with passion and love and joy. Show them as you're on your way here what it looks like to be a Christian, getting the privilege to worship. Actually live out the statement, well, we're so blessed to live in a country that doesn't persecute us for our religion, that live in a country that we get to experience religious freedom. Don't just say it, but show them what that means. Be thankful for that blessing. Our kids are going to learn priorities from our parents. Sometimes we do everything right and the kids still do things that we never taught them, and we got to navigate that, right? And that's going to be kind of what we talk about with the sermon when we have that lesson. But let's do everything we can to show the importance of having the right priorities. It's easy for it to get out of whack. I understand our jobs are important. I understand that taking care of our homes and yard maintenance and things of that nature are important. Those things, I get it. Sometimes, a person's livelihood, it affects being able to be here or not be here, and their ability to provide for themselves or their family. So we're not talking about that kind of thing where they come every time they can, and they've got a job that might kind of affect that. But we're looking more at personal choices where we easily could. I mean, you think about it. The furthest somebody that's here, now I'm not talking about people visiting, but if you live around this area, probably the furthest you had to drive to get here this morning was maybe 20 minutes, maybe, possibly 15. I know some might be 30. Some of you drove about maybe an hour and a half because you're so excited to hear the preacher. I don't know. So, Terry, you ain't got to laugh so loud, brother. But, if you think about it, okay, you have worships at 10:30, Bible class 9:30, okay? So that's 2 hours. Maybe 2.5 if you decide to stand around and talk for a while before you go to lunch. Now you factor in a drive time. Let's say 40 minutes total. So you go 2.5 hours, now you're just a little over 3 hours. 3:15, we'll say 3:15. Of an entire day, just for the morning time, okay? Evening worship is about an hour when we have services, right? So you're looking at about maybe 6 hours of a day. With driving all together, not even 6 hours. I'd say maybe 5 hours. But we don't have that extra hour and 15, hour and 20. You see what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't add up when you consider the time that we make available for all the things that we consider important. And it goes back to priority. And it goes back to a denial of self in order to pursue Jesus. And Jesus denied himself and died so that we could have this freedom. I know people fought for it for our country. But he died to make worship what it is for us, to give us an opportunity to praise God and to be with God. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to be ready when that opportunity comes. It's not a if we get in the can do it. It's a if we get an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes back to that mindset of how do we view it? Do we view it as opportunity? Do we view it as obstacle? Jesus saw opportunity where you and I typically see obstacles. And we've got to learn to see the opportunities. And being ready always to give a defense of of the hope that's within us with meekness and with fear, and to understand that those moments are going to come, and so be ready for those moments, those opportunities. That's it for this morning. I appreciate y'all so much. If you've not gotten a handout yet for the sermon, make sure to grab one. They are in both lobbies, and make sure to meet somebody new today that you haven't met before. We'll see you again in a few minutes.